Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 27th of June 2020. The list of articles that we shall be discussing today has been displayed on your screen. Time-stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now the first article appears on page number 6 as a lead article. The title of the article here is Getting Out of the Guns, Germs and Steel Crisis. Now the article that we are going to discuss here shall be important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Economy under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues. In the field of economics, we have a sub-branch known as the Development Economics. As the name suggests, this branch of economics deals with the development of countries. It seeks to understand as to why some countries are richer and prosperous and why some countries are poorer. Similarly, it provides us with a number of strategies that should be adopted in order to promote economic growth and development. Now, in the field of development economics, we have multiple models. One of the informal model used in the development economics is the model of guns, germs and steel. Please do note that this particular model used in the development economics is basically based upon a book which is written by an award-winning author known as Jade Diamond. According to this particular model, the prosperity or the wealth in a country in turn depends upon three important aspects. These three aspects are its ability to protect itself from an external threat, its ability to protect itself from the infectious diseases, and its ability to produce more amount of goods and services. So when these three aspects go together, automatically a country would be able to achieve higher amount of prosperity or wealth. Now, its ability to protect itself from an external threat. Such an ability can come to a country provided a country is able to invest substantial amount of its financial resources in improving its defense preparedness. So this in a way can be called as guns. Similarly, the ability of a country to protect itself from infectious diseases can come provided the country invests substantial amount of its financial resources on improving its healthcare infrastructure. So overall, its capability to protect itself from germs should enhance. And thirdly, a country should focus more upon the production of goods and services such as steel, which can be considered as a basic raw material for the industries. Now, the importance of guns and germs for the human civilization can be understood by looking at ancient history. Now, in the ancient history, we have come across a number of kingdoms who were quite rich as well as prosperous. But since they did not adequately focus on the guns or the germs, such kingdoms lost their relevance. Hence, for the prosperity of a country has to focus on all of these three aspects. Now, normally any country can face crisis with respect to guns, germs or steel. That means a country could face a threat from the external sources, a country could face a threat from infectious diseases, and a country can go into a kind of economic recession. Very rarely do all of these three crises occur at a single time. However, as you can see in case of India, these three crises are occurring simultaneously presently. For example, with respect to guns crisis, India is involved in a border standoff with China. With respect to germs crisis, India is seeing the rapid spread of COVID-19 virus. And with respect to steel, according to a number of estimates, the GDP growth rate of India in the year 2020, this is set to go into negative territory. That means the GDP growth rate of the Indian economy in the year 2020 is set to contract. So India is facing all of these three crises simultaneously. Hence, India is facing a confluence of military, health as well as economic crisis. Now, how India comes out of these three simultaneous crises would not only define the future trajectory of Indian economy, it may well define the future trajectory of world economy as well. Now, as far as the guns crisis is concerned, presently if you look at China's defense expenditure, the China's defense expenditure in percentage of its GDP at 1.3 percentage is much lower than the India's defense expenditure, which is almost around 2.3 percentage of its GDP. However, if you convert this percentage of GDP of the respective countries into absolute value, in terms of absolute value, China's defense expenditure is around $230 billion, whereas India's defense expenditure is around $67 billion. So in a way, China's defense expenditure is almost 3 times that of India. So going forward, in order to deal with the guns crisis, India has to substantially increase its defense expenditure. Doing so would enable India to improve its defense preparedness and counter the guns crisis. Next, with respect to germs crisis, as you all must be aware, India's combined healthcare expenditure, that is the healthcare expenditure by the center plus all the states put together, this is hardly around 1.5 percentage, and the target as enunciated under the national health policy is 2.5 percentage of India's GDP. So going forward, we need to ramp up India's healthcare expenditure, wherein it has to increase from the present level of 1.5 percentage to 2.5 percentage. Now, with respect to steel crisis, that is the present economic crisis, as you all must be aware, there are mainly 4 drivers of India's GDP. These 4 drivers are the consumption expenditure, government expenditure, investment, and the net value of exports. Out of these 4 drivers, it is the consumption expenditure which accounts for almost 60% of India's GDP. However, due to the lockdown which has been imposed in order to counter the COVID-19, the consumption expenditure within the Indian economy has been reducing, leading to the economic contraction. Hence, if we have to counter the steel crisis, that is the present economic crisis, we would have to enhance the consumption expenditure. And in order to boost the consumption expenditure, we would have to enhance the overall demand within the Indian economy. Now, such a demand of the Indian economy can be improved upon by announcing a fiscal stimulus package. That is, the government has to undertake higher amount of expenditure in order to boost the overall demand within the Indian economy. So in order to counter the guns, germs and steel crisis, the government would need more amount of financial resources. But the problem here is that the tax revenue that is being collected by the government of India, this has got reduced due to both economic slowdown as well as because of the lockdown imposed by COVID-19. So on one hand, the government of India is staring at higher expenditure obligations in order to counter the guns, germs and steel crisis, while on the other hand, its tax revenue has been reducing. Hence, the question which arises here is, what are the options before the government? Now, there are basically 2 options before the government. The first option here is the government may resort to the higher borrowings from the market. The borrowed money can then be injected into the economy, leading to the increase in the consumption expenditure. The other option before the government is asking the Reserve Bank of India to print more amount of money. That means the government here can go for direct monetization of its deficit. Now, the author of this particular article highlights that exercising either of these 2 options comes with its own set of problems. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us understand the implications of the higher borrowings from the market as well as the direct monetization of government's deficit, and what should the government do in order to counter the present economic crisis. Now, a main question that can be expected from this particular topic here could be, in order to counter the present economic slowdown, the government must take recourse to the direct monetization of its deficit only as a last resort. Discuss. Let us understand as to what are the various sources from where the government can borrow the money. The government can borrow the money directly from the market. The government may borrow the money indirectly from the Reserve Bank of India. This is referred to as the indirect monetization. Thirdly, the government of India can borrow the money directly from the Reserve Bank of India, in that case, it would be referred to as the direct monetization. Now, with respect to the first route, that is a direct borrowing by the government from the market, in order to borrow the money from the market, that is from the banks and the financial institutions, the government can issue the treasury bills and the dated securities, which are referred to as the government securities. Now, these government securities are auctioned by the Reserve Bank of India on behalf of the government of India. So, by issuing the treasury bills and the dated securities to the banks and financial institutions, the banks can borrow money directly from the market. The second route for the government is to borrow the money indirectly from the Reserve Bank of India, which, as stated earlier, is referred to as the indirect monetization. Now, let's say the government of India has issued a dated security, which is basically an instrument in order to borrow the long-term loans. Let's say here the government of India has issued a dated security worth 100 crores to a particular bank. Let's say in this particular case, it is the State Bank of India. So here the government of India has sold a dated security worth 100 crores to the State Bank of India, and by doing so, it has borrowed 100 crores from the SBI. Now, the Reserve Bank of India would come into picture. Now, in order to indirectly lend money to the government of India, the Reserve Bank of India would carry out the open market operations. Now, in case of open market operations, as you must be aware, there are basically two sets of operations that the RBI carries out. Now, in the first set of operations, the Reserve Bank of India may sell a government security, and by selling the government security, the RBI can suck out the excess money supply from the economy. The second case is the Reserve Bank of India can actually purchase the government security from the bank, and by purchasing the government security, the RBI can inject the money into the banking system. Now, in this particular case, that is in case of the indirect monetization of government's deficit, the RBI would purchase the treasury bill and the dated securities from the bank and thus inject the money into the economy. Now, in the example that we have considered here, the State Bank of India has this 100 crore worth dated security issued by the government of India. Now, what the RBI would do here is the RBI would purchase this same dated security worth 100 crore from the SBI, and then it would inject 100 crore into the State Bank of India. Now, if you see, there is additional inflow of money into the economy. That is, an additional 100 crores money has come into the Indian economy because of the indirect monetization of the government's deficit. Now, this can be understood by looking at the first part, that is when the government borrows the money from, say, the State Bank of India by issuing a dated security worth 100 crores. Now, here, this 100 crores worth of money is basically changing hands from the SBI to the government, and there is no additional inflow of the money. However, in the second case here, there is an additional inflow of 100 crores because of the Reserve Bank of India carrying out the open market operations. So, as you can see here, in case of indirect monetization of government's deficit, the RBI comes into picture and it is indirectly lending money to the government of India by carrying out the open market operations. Now, why this indirect monetization of government's deficit becomes important is because in recent times, the Reserve Bank of India has continuously resorted to the open market operations in order to indirectly monetize the government's deficit. The third route applicable for the government of India is to borrow the money directly from the RBI, and in that case, we would call it as the direct monetization. Now, before understanding as to how direct monetization actually takes place, let us first understand certain basics related to the printing of currency notes, which becomes quite important with respect to your prelims examination. Now, it is the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934 which lays down the basic framework for the printing of currency notes. As per this particular act, the Reserve Bank of India has a sole authority to print the currency notes, wherein as per this particular act, the RBI can print the currency notes of the denominations ranging from rupees 2 to rupees 10,000. So, if the RBI wishes to, then the RBI can print a currency note of a denomination of even rupees 10,000 as well. Further, please do note that as far as printing of currency note of rupee 1 is concerned, this currency note is being printed by the government of India. So unlike the other currency notes which carry the signature of the RBI governor, the rupee 1 currency notes carry the signature of the finance secretary. Apart from that, a question arises as to what conditions are required to be fulfilled in order to print the currency notes by the RBI. Now, in order to print the currency notes, the Reserve Bank of India has to maintain a minimum assets of rupees 200 crores. Out of these 200 crores, 115 crores worth should be maintained in the form of gold, that is in the form of gold bullion or the gold coins, and 85 crores in the form of the foreign securities. So RBI at all the times should compulsorily maintain a minimum assets of rupees 200 crore. So if RBI is able to maintain this much amount of currency notes, then RBI can print unlimited amount of currency notes. So as such, under the RBI Act 1934, there is no limit on the printing of currency notes. However, we all know that if RBI resorts to unlimited printing of currency notes, then the overall money supply within the Indian economy would increase. This will lead to increase in the demand. This will lead to hyperinflation, which can have long-term adverse implications on the Indian economy. So, whenever the RBI wants to print the currency notes, the RBI has to keep in mind the existing demand and supply prevailing within the economy. The RBI should ensure that the excess printing of currency notes should not lead to mismatch between the demand and the supply. Hence, in order to ensure the match between the demand and supply within the economy and to ensure that the printing of currency notes does not lead to higher inflation, the RBI looks at the GDP projections for a particular year. It takes into account the prevailing liquidity situations in the Indian economy. So based upon the GDP projections and the liquidity situation in the country, if RBI feels that currency notes have to be printed, then the RBI can resort to the printing of the currency notes. Now, this printing of currency notes of the RBI is undertaken by a separate department of the RBI known as the issue department. Now, just like any government department, the issue department of the RBI has certain assets and certain liabilities. And as you must be aware, the assets and liabilities should always match with each other. Now, with respect to issue department of the RBI, the currency notes which are in circulation, they are considered to be the liabilities. Whereas the government securities, that is the treasury bills as well as the dated securities with the RBI, they are considered to be the assets. So always there should be a match between the assets and the liabilities of the issue department. Let's say the Reserve Bank of India wants to print the currency notes worth 100 crores. Now this 100 crore worth currency notes once printed will ultimately find its way into the economy. That is, in future they will become the currency notes in circulation. So this currency notes which the issue department is going to print, that will be a liability. Hence, in order to match this liability, the issue department should have an asset. So here the asset should be a government security whose value is equal to 100 crore. So basically here, if RBI wants to print the currency notes worth 100 crore, RBI should have a government security whose worth is equal to 100 crore. So in a way, we are trying to ensure that the assets and liabilities of the issue department are matching with each other. Now, based upon this understanding of printing of currency notes, if you look at the direct monetization of the government's deficit, in case of the direct monetization of government's deficit, the government issues the treasury bills and the dated securities directly to the Reserve Bank of India, and by doing so, the government borrows the money. So as you can see here, in case of direct monetization, just like the indirect monetization, there is inflow of additional money into the Indian economy. Now coming to the challenges with direct monetization of government's deficit, and a very important question as to whether is it the right time for the government to go for the direct monetization. Now with respect to problems or concerns with respect to direct monetization of government's deficit, a number of economists have raised concerns that the direct monetization of government's deficit would lead to the increase in fiscal deficit, increase in public debt, leading to a debt trap. Now, debt trap is basically a condition wherein a country borrows money not for undertaking investment, but it borrows money in order to repay back the previous loans. Further, the economists have also highlighted that the direct monetization would lead to the increase in money supply, leading to the higher rate of inflation in future. Apart from that, the higher inflation would lead to downgrade in India's credit ratings, leading to the outflows of the FPIs, rupee depreciation, and thus this would lead to the depletion of forex reserves. Now, the author of this particular article calls this as the junk crisis. Now, with respect to concerns raised with the direct monetization, some of the economists have come up with their own counter arguments in order to favor the direct monetization. The economists who are supporting the direct monetization believe that we should be worried about the increase in public debt only when we borrow money in terms of the foreign currency. Since we cannot print the foreign currency, there could be a possibility that the increase in the foreign currency borrowings could lead to the debt trap for India. But in this particular case, that is in the case of the direct monetization, we are borrowing in our own currency. And since we are borrowing in our own currency and since we can print the currency whenever we want to, India can never default on its debt repayment. And hence, this can never lead to debt trap for India. The economists have also counter-argued that first and foremost that we need not be worried about the increase in the rate of inflation because of the direct monetization. This is so because our immediate priority right now is to revive the Indian economy. More importantly, going forward, the economic growth for the upcoming financial year is set to contract. Hence, since it is going to contract, inflation as such is not a cause of concern. Apart from that, the economists have also taken the support of the experience of the advanced economists in order to favor the direct monetization of government's deficit in India. For example, if you look at the advanced economists such as USA, Japan, some of the countries in the European Union, etc. Now, all of these countries have been following unconventional monetary policies such as the zero interest rate policy, negative interest rate policy, so on, since the 2008 financial crisis. Now, the basic idea behind such unconventional monetary policies is to maintain extremely lower rate of interest on the loans and to increase the money supply within the economies. Now, ideally, since these economies have been following such unconventional monetary policies since more than a decade, ideally this should have led to the increase in the money supply as well as the rate of inflation in their economies. However, in spite of following such unconventional monetary policies, the rate of inflation in these economies has not increased. So, based upon such an experience, the economists have counter-argued that even if we undertake the direct monetization, the inflation may not take place within the Indian economy. And lastly, with respect to junk crisis, the economists have highlighted that such kind of junk crisis may be short-term in nature. That is, it could be a short-term pain that India would probably have to take in order to have the long-term gain. So in the long term, the direct monetization would revive the economy and improve our credit ratings. We can see that there are a number of benefits associated with the direct monetization of government's deficit. But a very important question arises as to whether is it the right time for the Indian government to go for the direct monetization. So the question is, do we have the suitable conditions required for undertaking direct monetization? Now, first and foremost, if you look at our Indian economy, presently already we have a surplus liquidity of rupees 8 lakh crore with the banks as well as financial institutions. However, the problem here is that these banks and financial institutions are reluctant to lend loans because they fear that if they give more amount of loans presently during the present economic conditions as such, then this can lead to a further increase in their non-performing assets. So the overall idea behind the direct monetization is to enhance liquidity, but already we have surplus liquidity which is available with the banks. So first and foremost, we have to ensure that whatever liquidity is available with the banks and financial institutions, this liquidity as such should find a way into the economy. And this is what precisely the government has done through the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyaan. So under the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, the government has basically nudged or influenced the banks to give loans to various sectors, including the MSMEs. And in order to take away the risk factor from such loans, the government of India is acting as a guarantor on those loans. So before we think of the direct monetization of government's deficit, we must first and foremost ensure that there is no surplus liquidity in the economy. Direct monetization should take place only when the government feels that there is a shortage of liquidity within the Indian economy. Secondly, as you must be aware, the Reserve Bank of India has consistently been reducing the policy rates such as the repo rate in order to improve the policy transmission and to reduce the rate of interest on the loans. However, despite the decrease in the policy rate such as the repo rate, the interest rates on the loans has continued to remain higher. So, the poor monetary policy transmission has in turn affected the overall supply of liquidity within the economy. So, the direct monetization of government's deficit should take place only after the rate of interest on loans reduce, leading to the increase in the liquidity in the economy. So, in spite of the reduction in the rate of interest on loans, if the liquidity situation does not improve, only then the government should have to go for the direct monetization. And lastly, the government should be extra cautious with respect to the direct monetization, since as discussed before, this can lead to a possible increase in the rate of inflation. There is a possibility of the macroeconomic stability of Indian economy being affected adversely in future. Now, for example, the direct monetization as discussed before could lead to the higher fiscal deficit, higher public debt, decrease in foreign inflows, rupee depreciation. So undoubtedly, the direct monetization of government's deficit is a good option before the government of India. However, such an option should be exercised as a matter of last resort. Now, the next article appears on page number 10 and is titled as UP Government Helped Save 85,000 Lives, Prime Minister Modi. Now, the article that we are going to discuss here shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection Current Events of National Importance. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recently launched Atmanirbhar Uttar Pradesh Rojgar Abhiyaan. It is to be noted that this particular program is part of the GaribKalyanRojgarAbhiyaan, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi on June 20th. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand the various facets related to GaribKalyanRojgarAbhiyaan, such as the need for launching this particular program, the main features of this particular program, how is this program different from the present existing MG Narega program. So with respect to background, as you all must be aware, the lockdown imposed due to COVID-19 has caused the economic hardship to the urban migrants. A large number of urban migrants have been forced to return back to their rural areas. Now, most of these urban migrants have migrated back to 6 states. These 6 states are basically UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Odisha, and so on. Now, we need to understand that these urban migrants who have migrated back to rural areas, they are actually skilled or semi-skilled. So going forward, we need to engage these returning migrants in the construction of public works. Now, these returning migrants can be involved in construction of public works such as say construction of toilets, construction of houses in the rural areas, construction of rural roads, construction of national highways, and so on. Now, this will serve the dual objective of not only providing the employment opportunities to the returning migrants, but at the same time, this will help us in the development of the rural areas. So the basic objective behind the GaribKalyanRojgarAbhiyaan is to provide the employment opportunities to the returning migrants and at the same time create durable infrastructure in the rural areas, leading to their comprehensive and holistic development. Please do note that this particular program is presently implemented in 116 districts across the 6 states, which include UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Odisha, wherein out of these 116 districts, main emphasis should be laid on the 27 aspirational districts. Further, unlike the MG Narega program, which is implemented throughout the year, Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan would be implemented only for the next 125 days in a mission mode. With respect to kind of work that can be executed under this particular program, now the returning migrants could be engaged in 25 different types of public work such as construction of toilets, construction of roads, construction of wells, national highways, construction of rainwater harvesting structures under Jal Jeevan Mission, construction of houses under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and so on. And lastly, please do note that Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is not altogether a new scheme or program. Rather, it is an amalgamation of the existing schemes and programs which are implemented by 12 different ministries or departments. Now, for example, we have the Ministry of the Drinking Water and Sanitation, which is presently implementing the Jal Jeevan Mission. Now, the returning migrants may be involved in the construction of the rainwater harvesting structures as part of the Jal Jeevan Mission implemented by the Ministry of Jal Shakti. Similarly, the Ministry of Rural Development is presently implementing the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, that is the construction of rural roads. Now, the returning migrants may be involved in construction of rural roads as part of the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Similarly, the returning migrants may be involved in the construction of houses under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So, as you can see, Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is not an altogether a new scheme or program. Rather, it is an amalgamation of the different schemes and programs that are implemented by 12 different ministries and departments. Now, coming to last dimension as to how this program is different from the present existing MG Narega program. Now, as you must be aware, the MG Narega program is implemented throughout the year, whereas Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is a one-time scheme that would be implemented for the next 125 days. The MG Narega program seeks to provide 100 days of minimum employment to the rural unemployed youths, whereas Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan seeks to provide an employment opportunity to the returning migrants for the next 125 days. MG Narega program is implemented throughout India, whereas Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is implemented in 116 districts in the 6 states. Further, as you must be aware, MG Narega has a legal backing wherein the workers have the legal right to work. However, no such legal right to work has been provided under Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan. MG Narega is implemented by the Ministry of Rural Development, whereas the Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is a coordinated efforts of 12 different ministries and departments. Now, coming to the last and most important difference, under the MG Narega program, certain amount of funds can be used for the development of the individual farmer's land. However, the individual farmer here should be a farmer who belongs to the poor and vulnerable sections of Indian society. For example, the farmer here should belong to a category of either the SCs or STs. So, a certain amount of MG Narega funds can be used for the development of the individual farmers who belong to the category of the SCs or STs. However, for utilization of such MG Narega funds, prior approval of the Gram Sabha is needed. Now, as far as the Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan is concerned, under this particular program, the workers will be involved only in the development of community works, and the funds as such cannot be used for the development of the individual farmers' land. Now, these are some of the important differences between the MG Narega program and the Garib Kalyan Rojgar Abhiyaan. Next, on page number 15, we have an article that is titled as RBI Board Reviews the State of Economy. Now, this particular article highlights that the Central Board of Directors of the RBI has met for the first time since a nationwide lockdown in order to review the present state of Indian economy. Hence, with respect to your upcoming prelims, you should understand certain basic details related to the Central Board of Directors of the RBI, the appointment and the removal of the RBI Governor, the composition of the Central Board of Directors. Let us understand these facets one by one. Now, the Central Board of the RBI has been set up under the provisions of the RBI Act 1934. Under the RBI Act 1934, the Central Board of the RBI, it is the highest decision-making body. It also has the power of the general superintendence and the direction of the affairs as well as the business of the RBI. Now, with respect to composition of the Central Board of Directors of the RBI, the board comprises of maximum of 21 members. Now, these 21 members include the official directors, non-official directors, as well as the directors of the regional heads of the Reserve Bank of India. With respect to official directors, the official directors are the governor of the RBI as well as the 4 deputy governors. Now, the official directors are considered to be the full-time members of the Central Board of Directors, and they are appointed for a duration which is not more than 5 years. With respect to non-official directors, the non-official directors basically include 10 nominated directors as well as 2 government officials. Now these 10 directors, they are basically nominated directors and they are people from various fields. With respect to 2 government officials, they are basically the officials who represent the government in the Central Board of Directors of the RBI, and they are normally the Financial Affairs Secretary, that is the Secretary to Department of Financial Affairs, and Economic Affairs Secretary. So these 2 secretaries of the departments, by default, they are members of the Central Board of Directors of the RBI and they hold office indefinitely. As far as the nominated directors are concerned, the nominated directors are nominated for a period which is not more than 4 years. As far as the other members are concerned, the other members are the heads of the regional headquarters of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, with respect to the appointment, term, qualification and removal of the RBI governor, now coming to the process of appointment, now presently we have a committee which is known as the Financial Sector Regulatory Appointment Search Committee. This committee is headed by the Cabinet Secretary. Now, this committee prepares a list of names for being appointed as the RBI governor. Now, this particular list is then sent to the Cabinet Committee on Appointments headed by the Prime Minister of India. So, out of the total list of names provided by the Financial Sector Regulatory Appointment Search Committee, the Cabinet Committee on Appointments headed by Prime Minister would choose a single name and such a person would go on to become the RBI governor. Now, if you look at the RBI Act 1934, it states that the governor and the deputy governor shall hold office for a term not exceeding 5 years. Usually what happens is when a person is appointed as a RBI governor, he is appointed for a term of 3 years, and once his term of 3 years is completed, he is given a further extension for another 2 years. However, in some of the cases in the recent past, this extension of 2 years was not given to some of the RBI governors. Further, the RBI governor is eligible for reappointment. There is no qualification laid down for a person to be appointed as a RBI governor, and with respect to removal, the RBI governor can be removed by the central government. Now the next article appears on page number 10 and is titled as Hardship May Push People into Making Drugs for a Living. Now this article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection Current Events of International Importance. Now this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of an international report known as the World Drug Report, which is published by the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs and Crime. Now this particular article becomes important because a related question on the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has already been asked in Prelims 2019. Let us try to understand various aspects related to this particular article. Now we all know that there is a nexus between drugs, organized crime as well as terrorism, wherein the proceeds from the trade of illegal drugs is in turn diverted either for the organized crime as well as terrorism. Hence we need to crack down on the production, distribution as well as trade of the illegal drugs. Hence, in order to promote awareness against the drug abuse, on June 26th every year, we observe the International Day against drug abuse and illicit trafficking. Apart from that, in order to break the nexus between the illegal drugs, organized crime as well as terrorism, we have a separate office known as the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs as well as Crime. Now such an office comes out with a report which is known as the World Drug Report, which highlights the various aspects related to the production, distribution as well as the trade of illegal drugs taking place across the world. Now this article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recently published World Drug Report. Now this report highlights that the lockdown imposed due to COVID-19 has not only caused the economic hardship, but it has led to the depressive tendencies among the people. On account of these two factors, there is a greater propensity among the people to resort to the illegal drugs. In particular, people have resorted to the synthetic drugs. Now, there are a number of problems with respect to these synthetic illegal drugs. First and foremost, if you look at the traditional drugs such as opium, they are cultivated in certain regions of the world, and hence it becomes quite easier for the international organizations such as the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs and Crime to keep a tab on the movement of such drugs. But when it comes to synthetic drugs, these synthetic drugs can be manufactured anywhere across the world, and hence it becomes extremely difficult to track the movement of such synthetic drugs. Secondly, these synthetic drugs are considered to be much more harmful to the human body. Thirdly, these synthetic drugs are much more addictive as compared to the traditional drugs. Now, with respect to the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs and Crime, such an office was established in the year 1997 by combining two other offices. These two offices were the United Nations International Drug Control Program and the Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice Division. The basic mandate of this organization is to make the world safer from drugs, organized crime, corruption, as well as terrorism. So the basic idea is to break the nexus between all of these four illegal activities. With respect to the scope of activities carried out by the United Nations Office of Control on Drugs and Crime, first and foremost, it helps the member states to ratify and implement the United Nations Convention against the Transnational Organized Crimes. Secondly, it helps the member states to ratify and implement the United Nations Convention against Corruption, and at the same time, it helps the member states to develop domestic legislation in order to prevent the corruption. Thirdly, it helps the member states to implement the various legal instruments against the global terrorism. Further, as you must have seen in previous year prelims, normally questions are asked with respect to the international reports published by various agencies. Accordingly, the United Nations Office on Control of Drugs and Crime publishes the international reports, which are the World Drug Report, Global Study on Homicide, Global Study on Trafficking in Persons, and Global Study on Smuggling of Migrants. Having understood all of these aspects, let us solve the question that was asked in Prelims 2019. Now, if you look at the first statement, it says the United Nations Convention Against Corruption has a protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. The second option reads the United Nations Convention Against Corruption is the first ever legally binding global anti-corruption instrument. Now, the second statement which is given here is right. So, since the second statement is right here, you can easily rule out the option A. The third statement reads as a highlight of the United Nations Convention Against the Transnational Organized Crime is the inclusion of specific chapter aimed at returning assets to their rightful owners from whom they have been taken away illicitly. The fourth option reads as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is mandated by its members to assist in implementing of both United Nations Convention Against Corruption and United Nations Convention Against the Transnational Organized Crime. Now, as we have discussed here, the fourth statement is correct. Now, if you look at the first statement here, it says the United Nations Convention Against Corruption has a protocol against smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. Please do note that it is the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime that has a protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. So the first option which is given here is wrong. Similarly, if you read the third statement, it says a highlight of the United Nations Convention Against the Transnational Organized Crime is the inclusion of specific chapter aimed at returning assets to the rightful owners from whom they have been taken away illicitly. Now, with respect to third statement here, this is a feature of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and not the United Nations Convention Against the Transnational Organized Crime. So even the third option given here is wrong. Accordingly, the right answer in this particular case would be C, that is 2 and 4 only. Now the next article appears on page number 14 and is titled as ASEAN States Warn of South China Sea Tensions. Now recently the ASEAN group of countries came together in order to attend the 36th annual summit. Now this annual summit was hosted by Vietnam, who happens to be the current chair of ASEAN group of countries. Now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the summit was held through teleconference. Now, one of the main agenda of the summit was to discuss and strengthen cooperation on public health emergencies caused due to COVID-19. At the same time, countries such as Vietnam and Philippines have raised concerns over the growing instability in the South China Sea on account of the maritime disputes with China. Now, this aspect of maritime dispute in the South China Sea has been discussed in our DNS dated 23rd of June 2020 as well as DNS dated 24th of June 2020. Now, in these two DNS, we have discussed in detail about the various islands which are disputed in the South China Sea. We have discussed concepts such as why is South China Sea relevant for India, what should be the India's maritime strategy to deal with the maritime disputes in the South China Sea, and so on. So since this particular article on the tensions in the South China Sea has recently been covered in our DNS, we would not be covering this article once again in today's DNS. Now coming to the question for the day, the question here is, with reference to printing of currency notes in India, consider the following statements. The first statement here is, RBI has the authority to print all the currency notes including the currency notes of rupee 1 denomination. The second statement is, there is no requirement for the RBI to maintain any assets for printing the currency notes. Now with respect to question for the day for the 26th of June 2020, the question here was, arrange the following from north to south. The options which are given here are Depsan Plain, Pangong Lake, Galwan Valley, Daulat Beg Oldie Post. Now if you arrange all of these four options from north to south, then the answer here would be B, that is 4132. That is Daulat Beg Oldie Post followed by Depsan Plain followed by Galwan Valley, and then we would have the Pangong Lake.